Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel and to this little midweek video where I will be looking at the Flames of War mission pack as it was in April 2023. So some of you might not know, obviously there's missions in the back of the rule books for Flames of War, that there are more missions available online, and it's on the Flames of War website, their homepage. So if you go scrolling down, you should be able to see the missions pack. It's free, and there's should be a few more missions compared to the rule book that could be challenging or a lot more fun to play, and there's other things as well. So this video, what I'll be doing is having a look at the missions you can have by going through the mission matrix, which we'll have a little look at, and how I would build a list to play that mission, and maybe some tactics on how to play it. But bear in mind, it's a dice game. So best laid plans of dice and men will come into it. So obviously sometimes you will make your list knowing the mission, and in case if you're going to be doing that, you kind of having a mix of almost everything to cover every basis, so you'd be in reserves, ambush, spearhead, infantry, artillery, etc. But when you know the mission and you know whether you're going to be the attacker or defender, you can have a bit better plan on the list to build. So if you know you're going to be in attacking, but it's too close for spearhead, then you won't need a spearhead unit. Or if you're defending, maybe more infantry, more anti-tank guns, etc. But that's what this video is going to be covering. So I hope you enjoy. And first of all, we'll have a little look at the missions matrix. Okay, so the first time I came across the mission matrix, or battle plans, I thought it was a great way to pick a mission, because obviously you pick your stance: attack, maneuver, or defend. Your opponent does the same, or you can do it in secret if you want. Secret's a bit better, and then that will lead you to which road to go to, and then you roll for your mission. And sometimes, depending on what you want, you will be the attacker or defender. Now if you pick attack, if your opponent picks maneuver or defend, you will be the attacker. And then if your opponent picks the attacker, it's most likely going to be a meet and engagement with a few exceptions. So why should you pick attack? With the attack battle plan, you'll be attacking in fairly straightforward missions. This suits forces that rely on brute force over mobility. You'll be able to focus your firepower to reduce the enemy piece by piece as you advance into their defensive positions. And then with maneuver, a maneuver battle plan allows you to exploit your mobility while avoiding assaults against fortified positions. This suits forces that have a good mix of mobility and firepower. You won't be trapped into a grinding battle of attrition and can maneuver rapidly to defend your opponent. And then why select defend? A defend battle plan allows you to dig in and force the enemy to come to you. You can lay out carefully planned defenses without needing to worry about maneuvering light troops across open ground. This suits infantry forces with a good anti-tank capability. And just to say, this is the extended battle plan. There's a more basic version, say, for people who are quite new to the game, so the missions are going to be more straightforward. I think that should be in your rulebook anyway, but all of these have been updated to incorporate new missions, so the rulebook might not be quite up to date, but there you go. Before we go looking at the first mission, I'd like to mention if you are new to the hobby, thinking of getting into it or expanding on your current forces, I definitely recommend trying out Firestorm games, where you'll get a great discount. They're quick and reliable, and they do have excellent customer service. So the link for these guys will be in the description. It will take you straight to the Flames of War page on their website. By clicking my link, you'll be helping to support my channel, and obviously you'll help me promote me and get more content and better content really for you, the viewers. Okay, first mission is Breakthrough. So from the attacker is an interesting mission because you have flanking delayed reserves, which means you only need to put one unit in reserve, and that'll be coming, as you can see here, the top right corner, but it's delayed, so you won't be able to start rolling until turn 3. And for reserves, you need a 5-up to bring them in. The defender will have a unit to place an ambush, which is always quite handy, and they also have immediate reserves that come in from the corner. But with this one, as you can see, the defender will not be placing their units on the objective. They might be if the attacker, if the objective is placed really close to the corner, you might be able to deploy some units in contesting it, but otherwise you may have to move a unit to go and dig into it if they can dig in, because they might be tanks. So attacking wise, I would like something fast, mobile, to try and maybe just go straight for the objective, because although you don't have to worry about taking the objective and defending the objective straight on, because the objective isn't live until after turn 6. So you can get on it turn 1, turn 2 as the attacker, but it won't matter because nothing's going to happen. So maybe some armoured infantry to come around to get it, but if I had armoured infantry, it would be nice to come in from reserve and maybe dig in, and maybe have some armoured support waiting for them ready. As a defender, again, you'll want some infantry to go and cover those objectives with some good mobile units to come in and do some hard hitting, and maybe one good unit, anti-tank unit in ambush. So like a tank destroyer like M10s, or maybe even Pack 40s, etc. Another good addition to your lists as the attacker or defender, if you have the spare points, maybe a command card that forces your opponent to re-roll successful reserve rolls, especially for the defender, since obviously it's going to be minimum turn 3. Well, turn 3 they'll start rolling, but then 3 turns later, then they'll have a unit at least. So if you can delay that, the better, really. Okay, next up we have bridgehead. So there's no special rules for the attacker in this one, other than they start with everything, which is always nice. The defender has ambush again. They also have deep, scattered, immediate reserves. So immediate, obviously you get them from turn 1, but deep, scattered, basically in late war, you basically, a battle tank unit is one with front armor of 4 or more, and you can't have more than one of them starting. So if you know this mission, you're not going to be building a tank force to defend with it, because you're going to be absolutely ruined by this rule. And that's why if you've got an armored force, don't pick defend, because if you have deep scattered reserves, you might start with 1 tank and maybe a recce unit or an infantry platoon, and that's it. But then in mid-war, it's armor 3 or more. But you do have minefields, so you'll have a minefield for every 25 point of your force. So standard 100 point game will have 4. So be careful how you use them, because you kind of want to block off certain areas. Probably the most advantageous avenue for attack. Personally, for me, I like putting them just on the wings, where the attacker's deployment zone meets the halfway line. It's to stop them spearheading into your flanks. But they can still do it. They'll just have to go through a minefield in order to do it. So you might get some kills on the board before even the game starts. The attacker will go first with no penalty, and they will win if they end their turn holding the objective, and the defender needs to repel the attacker by the end of turn 6. That basically means the attacking player can't have anyone within 8 inches of an objective. Obviously they need to be active. They can't, if they bailed, it doesn't count. So attacking, I would definitely like a spearhead unit to hopefully spearhead down the flanks. Some armor, mixture of infantry, definitely have artillery, because the defender is going to be packed into this tight area, and they get to pick the area to defend. So if there's buildings, they're going to be there. So you need infantry to clear them out. As a defender, obviously, you only get that 1 tank unit to start, so it's probably going to be a tank destroyer or anti-tank guns, infantry to hold the objective, maybe spearhead yourself, because you get to deploy first. You can go onto the flanks to stop the attacker going there as well. But the ideal thing to do is to have the least amount of reserves as possible, so try and get it down to 2 units if you can. Bear in mind they are delayed, so there you go. And obviously, as the attacker, you have the choice. You can go straight head on when it's only 16 inches until you hit the enemy deployment zone, or you can use that flank attack. Sometimes I like to have the spearhead unit to make my opponent think I'm going to do that. There's one mission in particular I like to do that, but it's just, remember, the defender deploys their entire army fully before you deploy, so you can counter deploy how they do it. But remember, watch out for minefields, and that's why you need infantry as well to dig them out. And as the British, you'll be able to night attack, and with some other forces, depending on what formation you take, you can also take night attack as well. Okay, bypass is an interesting mission because the attacker is attacking, but is kind of a defending at the same time with this one. The defender has their units in a little box in the middle, but both of the objectives in another little box, and they need to defend. But they can also threaten the attacker's deployment zone because both forces have reserves. The attacker has immediate reserves, and the defender has scattered delayed reserves. So scattered means they come in from wherever you roll these dice. The defender does have ambush, but to help out the defender, the attacker has meet and engagement, which means all the units are counted as move in. So they use their moving rate of fire, and they can't fire a bombardment, and no aircraft, so can help as well. And also no spearhead either, so that means the attacker can't get that little jump forward to get to the deployment zone, and the defender can't do it either to push up a bit further. So basically, to win this game, a player wins if they end their turn on or after the third turn holding the objective they placed. So that does give the defender time to counter attack any thrusts that go through, because as you get into the war, there's some very fast units, depending on the terrain, that can get from the attacker's deployment zone to this zone where the objectives will be. So that's what you're kind of looking for. So Russians, Cromwells, armoured units to go fast. But remember, as the attacker, you still want to defend your objectives as well. So maybe bring along 2 infantry platoons to dig in and hold. Artillery-wise, yeah, it's going to be good. I wouldn't invest in it too much because you're not going to be able to use it that first turn, but you'll probably want something that's got a decent range, because if you want a smoke barrage to cover your advance as you go along, you'll kind of want that. As the defender, you get an ambush unit, so something that can hit hard. You're going to want something nice and mobile to get to those objectives, because you kind of want to tick that box first before you even think about going for the attacker's deployment zone, unless it's very weakly defended. But remember, his reserves are coming, or her reserves are coming from that area as well. So I probably start with focusing on defending my objectives. You got 3 turns to do it, or 3 turns to contest it, because let's face it, although you're starting to roll for turn 3 for your reserves, they might not be coming in for a while, and remember, they might not be coming in where you want them to. So defend first if you're the defender. Maybe if you have a recce unit, it's always good taking along. They're not that expensive, just to kind of be a nuisance going straight into the attacker's deployment zone and threaten an objective. Might cause them to shift their advance a bit. Okay, so cornered next. Quite an interesting mission. So by the layout, so obviously the defender's stuck in this little corner, hence why it's called cornered, with the objectives stuck in there. And this time the defender's deployment zone protrudes beyond the halfway points of its little corner it's in, which is quite interesting. So there are no limitations for the attacker, which is always nice. The defender has ambush, immediate reserves, and minefields, so quite nice. The attacker wins if they end their turn on or after the 6th turn, so objectives aren't live until turn 6, so you don't have to rush straight for them. Obviously, if you can and you have the ability to do it, just go for it. But otherwise, you can just slowly grind onto the objective, get yourself into the position so you're within 8 with a few units. You can't just lose the game and then just slowly grind your way. So I think you might be able to get my booklet is completely different layout, so I think you will definitely be able to spearhead round the corner. So again, you can threaten the flank, Now, because there's minefields again, you could night attack if they have the ability. And then we should probably explain what night attack is. So if you pick night attack in the formation you have as night attack, they can move out of their deployment zone. The rest of your force, unless they have the night attack rule, can't. So when it's night, everything has to move at terrain dash speed or tactical. If you shoot at a unit, you first have to roll to see if you can see it. So this is basically a dice roll plus times 4. So obviously you roll a 1, all you can see is 4 inches, and obviously it's very limited. Everything you shoot at is +1 harder to hit. Ranging in is +1 harder as well. If you have fired though, units firing at you don't need to roll on this that visibility chart, so they can just shoot, but remember it's still +1 harder, so it's very difficult to see and even hit things at night. The defender, at the start of their turn 3, will roll a die. On a 5 up, dawn is broken and everything is back to normal and everything can move as normal. On the attacker's turn after that, 2 dice, then the defender's turn 3, 4, 5, 6, until a 5 is rolled, then dawn appears. So bear in mind, it's a good way to get your troops into position, but you could end up knackering yourself because you might not have the support you need with your units as they move up. But I use it quite a lot as the British, especially later in the war when they become quite reluctant, because obviously one bad artillery hit on them, they might not rally for the rest of the game. So yeah, it's a good way to get into the position to keep the game going with taking limited casualties. Bear in mind, when you try to range in, it's going to be very difficult. So obviously, if you are taking artillery and you want to do a night attack, try to go for veteran stuff, or have that command card where you get to reposition the ranged in marker, because the defender will you'll know where their units are at that point, so that's going to be good. As a defender, infantry, anti-tank guns, maybe tank hunters for the reserve, and some mobile reserves to come in, so armored units is probably what I would go for. Counterattack is another mission where the defender's objectives, or at least one of them, will not be in the deployment zone. But not to matter, the game, they don't become active until turn 6 anyway. There's no limitation for the attacker. The defender will have ambush, and they will have immediate reserves that will come in from the corner that the attacker might be coming from, like their axis of attack for the objective. So the attacker will have first turn in counterattack. The attacker would be nice to have spearhead, although remember, even rushing onto the objective isn't going to do anything because you got 6 turns. But what I like to do is to get into a position to already be within 8 of an objective, so you can't lose the game. Maybe get some infantry there to dig them in and hold it, but to get some units in place to deal with the defender's reserves. So with any luck, they'll be coming in dribs and drabs, so you can pick them off as they come in, because they're going to be coming from this corner. You know exactly where they're coming from. Depending on the terrain, you can position yourself to deal with them. The other option you can do is just to go straight into the defender's deployment zone. Remember, they're only going to have about 60% of their force there anyway, so you could just do a sledgehammer strike going straight for them. Defender, you might be able to spearhead out of your deployment zone. It all depends where the objective is, because remember, you can't spearhead within 16 inches of an objective outside of your deployment zone. But what you do need is something, probably mobile infantry, to get out of your deployment zone in your turn and get to that objective to dig in on it. Remember, you still got 6 turns, but you don't want to let the attacker build up strength on that objective, because you might not have enough power to shift them off if they dig in there themselves. But remember, you also got another objective to defend, so definitely have another infantry platoon to defend that. Your ambush, anti-tank guns, but in this case I definitely have tank destroyers, just so they can move to a different area because they might need to. And I definitely have tank units in reserve, and maybe more tank units just to come out of the deployment zone. Okay, so counter strike is basically counter-attack, but they've mixed it up a little bit. So in this one, the biggest difference is the defender will go first. They will also have meet and engagement, which I think is fair because otherwise the attacker could lose quite a lot of units to some shooting. So interestingly, as the defender, you could pop your ambush this turn, but bear in mind it's a meet and engagement, so it will suffer from moving rate of fire, but you have the option to do it, especially if you have a big heavy gun that has to be more than 16 inches away. It means the attacker can't stop where you are able to place your ambush. It does give you that turn to get onto the objective outside your deployment zone. So basically, the difference with counter-attack and counter-strike, you'll be able to get potentially in force onto the objective. And if you're lucky, you might even get a unit of reserves in, which is awesome. But remember, it's the meet and engagement. The other bad thing for the attacker in this one is the defender wins if there's no units within 8 inches after turn 6. So effectively, you have one less turn to do this than you did last in counter-attack. But it does help the defender a lot, and it's quite good. So list-wise, I'd probably keep it similar. Remember, the attacker still gets that spearhead move, so you still might be able to get units in that pocket where the defender's reserves will arrive from. But bear in mind, they might be able to get a jump on you before you get a jump on them, but you will have the return fire next turn. So an interesting change around with this mission, I think. Covering force is an interesting one because both sides start with everything. That's very, very nice. The defender has ambush and minefields, and they also have strategic withdrawal, which we have not seen yet. There's also some other things. The attacker wins if they end their turn holding an objective, but otherwise the defender wins at the start of their 8th turn after checking force morale. So this mission is 8 turns, unless the attacker wins or the defender wins before that, but no more than 8, and that's that. No point taking spearhead units for spearhead, if you know what I mean, for either force because you're already within 16 inches. Defender would be quite good to have a lot of little units that you don't really want, because I'll explain why. Because strategic withdrawal. So basically, the defender starts the game with no delay counters. At the start of each turn from turn 3 onwards in this mission, after checking victory conditions, the defender counts the number of units, not counting their attachments and any independent teams, and delay counters they have on the table. If the total is 6 or more, they must withdraw 1 unit other than independent teams and its attachments and remove all delay counters. If they have less than 6 units and delay counters combined, they gain a delay counter but do not withdraw a unit. And when you withdraw a unit, when the defender is required to withdraw a unit, all of the teams of that unit and its attachments are removed from the table. An attachment must always be withdrawn with its core unit. If the withdrawing unit is not in good spirits, it will be treated as being destroyed when working out victory points. Also, bear in mind good spirits for formations, because that does count if they've withdrawn from the unit because they're not on table. So be careful there. But overall, it's a very fun, can be quite tense, because at the point if you're not losing units, you will have to withdraw them, and you have to be really careful about what you withdraw. That's why it's good to have loads of little units like AA, machine guns, little mortars that you might not need late game, and you're not going to miss by not having them around. But what I would like as a defender is obviously good infantry force, with anti-tank guns and tanks to maybe move around. Obviously you've got that ambush, which is good. As the attacker, night attack would be good because you've got minefields, but bear in mind time is definitely of the essence in this mission. So it's going to be tricky because you're against a full strength defensive force. So you could wait it out for a turn or two, maybe plugging at them with artillery to loosen them up, but you need to start moving quickly because you need to be within 4 inches at the end of your turn 7. Because if you're not, you won't be able to push them off and take the objective by turn 8. Or the other option is just to break the enemy formation, but that sometimes can not be an option. Next we have dogfight. So the defender has ambush, deep, scattered, delayed reserves, and minefields. So remember, if you're thinking of defending with loads of tanks, you won't be doing it in dogfight, because you will be defending, but you just won't have a lot of stuff on the table, and it could be over quite quickly. Especially since in this mission, the attacker wins if they end their turn holding the objective. Otherwise, after turn 6, if the attacker's not within 8, the defender wins. Obviously, the minefield's always good as well. So the attacker with this one is a bit of a nightmare, because spearhead units aren't going to get you any closer. Problem is once you go beyond that halfway line, when the defenders, if the defenders' reserves arrive in, if they roll a 1, 2, a 5, or a 6, they could be in your flank, on your side armor, and that might not be great. And also, you might have a solid defensive line in front of you, which you should do, and also minefields. So again, you can night attack, which would be good, but remember, you'll be leaving your supporting units behind, and they'll have a good 24 inches to cover to get position on the objectives. Well, 20 inches, and then they might be contesting the objective where you place it. As a defender, again, mobile reserves to come in, at least 2 infantry platoons to dig in on the objectives, anti-tank guns, there you go. Maybe something to bring in your reserves quicker if you've got access to that, because it could be a while before you see them. Okay, Dust Up is one of those missions you will tend to have if you both pick the same stance, because it's meet and engagement only for the first player and delayed reserve for both players. So this one, the way it works is you deploy, you alternate in deployment. You do have room for spearheads as well, which is always good. But then, before the game starts, you roll a die and the highest one goes first. You don't know who's going to go first to start with. But whoever does goes first is meet and engagement. So halted rate, moving rate of fire, no artillery, no planes. There we go. But the objectives are live, straight up, and the reserves for either side will be coming kind of like the flanks of your deployment zones, if you consider that the front lines are facing each other at this angle. So with like most meet and engagement missions, you have a choice. Depending on the size of your force and what you're playing and what you're up against, depending on how much they have in reserve and how much they're starting with. Option 1 is go for it, turn 1, go for the objective. Sometimes that might be your only option, because some people you're playing against, some lists you're playing against, is you either win early or not at all, and that's your option. So you have to think of the terrain, have a look at what they've got before you decide that. Sometimes you can, it depends what you have and what they have. Option 2, dig in, sit and wait for the reserves to arrive. But bear in mind, as you do that, your opponent's going to be building up their strength at the same time. So just bear in mind. And also, they might also be trying to get you straight away. So make sure you cover your objectives and just do it that way. But it's always nice to have a spearhead unit, because it can be a nuisance and it can lock down a few units so your opponent can't make that stab for your objective from turn 1. But bear in mind, if you are going to go for a hell for leather approach in turn 1, bear in mind you might not be going first. So either make sure they're hidden, covered, just so you don't lose your attacking force. And also maybe play that card that you're going to probably end up doing that later on. So those units you want to be doing attacking with, deploy them last. So then maybe your opponent will end up committing too much to one area, so then you can exploit a weak area. So keep the key units you want to attack with to deploy last. So if you have a lot of smaller units, a lot of maybe like a scout car formation, deploy them all first, deploy your infantry first, I would say good, if you can, have an infantry platoon or two just to cover your own objectives, just so they can't be taken easily. And then maybe your armor to flank around. But bear in mind, you're going to have 40% of your list in reserve. So the least amount you can have in reserve, the best. So ideally, 1 or 2 is probably going to be 2. And you can also think of having a command cards that can be used to delay your opponent's reserves as well. Okay, so encirclement next. So the attacker does have some limitations, this one. So obviously they're 2 little tiny deployment zones. They have to split their force 40–60% to have them in between these zones. So it's interesting, mostly for the attacker, it's not much of a problem because they still get to start with everything anyway, so it's always nice. The defender has ambush, they have minefields, but this time it's only for every 50 point, so a 100-point game they'll only have 2. And they have scattered immediate reserves. If you think about it, it is fair, because if they had 4 minefields for a 100-point game, you could block quite a lot of at least one of these deployment zones with that. The attacker wins if they end their turn holding an objective, otherwise it's turn 6 if it's repelled. But scattered immediate is quite good for the defender, because you kind of unless, depends, if the furthest up objective, 1, 2, 5 and 6 might be a problem, but hopefully you've got an infantry platoon dug in on them. So again, for the defender, a good 2 infantry platoons would be good, with your mobile anti-tank and armor to come in. The attacker, you have the option to night attack again. Remember, you can spearhead into this middle bit. You'll be a little bit further back than your initial 16 inches out, and then you can just do a full frontal assault then at night. It does work sometimes, but you've got a lot of chewing to get through to get to that point. Yeah, there's your options there. Okay, so encounter is another meet and engagement like dust up, but this time you'll face off against each other and you've got scattered delayed reserves. So essentially, again, it's that option 1, option 2 from dust up. Do you go hell for leather turn 1 to win early, or not at all, or just wait and build up your strength while your opponent does the same, but keeping hold of your objectives? The trick with this one, I find personally, is putting your objectives as far apart as possible, obviously the ones you're after, to split your opponent as much as possible. And then if you are going to do your initial assault, just go straight for one of them and hope when the reserves do come on, they roll and they come in the wrong place. To be honest, very rarely it ever happens, because you've got, it's 4 in 6 chance that they'll arrive where they need to be, because unless they roll really badly. But there's your option there for this one. So it's quite straightforward. Remember, if you do end up going first, it's meet and engagement. You do have a little room for spearheading in this one, but not much. Depends, your opponent can block your spearhead by doing one themselves. But remember, the objectives are active straight up. But overall, quite a fun game. Sometimes you can end up winning the game or losing the game before even both sides' full forces are on the table. But that's the plan you have to choose. You're going to sit, defend. But then remember, you defend whoever you're up against, their strength is going to be increasing as well, all at the same time. It all depends on what you decide on the day. Personally, though, I like to just go straight for it. Okay, so another interesting mission, escape. So basically, you can see here that the attackers' units are kind of stuck in the middle of their half of the table, and you can see as well that defenders' reserves are arriving from behind them as well. So the essential question in this mission: who's trying to escape? The defender will have ambush and immediate reserves. No minefields in this one. Very important you get this one right, chaps. The defender goes first in this mission, so make sure you remember that. And remember, then the attacker has that one last turn to take that objective. So they win if they hold an objective, otherwise turn 6 if they're not within 8, it's game. So as the attacker, you need to think you're going to have a good sized force to keep going forward, and you need to get going forward straight off, otherwise, you could be in trouble. But you also want to put a couple of units as a rear guard to deal with the opponent's reserves coming in, depending on what they are. So maybe mobile anti-tank, because once they're dealt with, they need to be elsewhere. And infantry, armoured infantry, tanks to go forward. As a defender, 2 good infantry platoons to hold the objective. You get an ambush unit, so anti-tank guns, tank destroyers, and then coming in from reserve, just some hard-hitting tanks, maybe some good armour, good AT to come in. If the attacker is good, I'd say just move everything if you can. Hopefully the defender's reserves haven't arrived at this point anyway, because the more you keep moving, the more the defender's reserves will have to arrive before they can even do anything against you anyway. So, but again, it'll all depend on terrain, so obviously you might want to move to a more advantageous position. Okay, fighting withdrawal is covering force, but the old version. So the only difference with this one is you are withdrawing units from turn 2 onwards, and I believe that is, I think, yep, there's no other difference. It's still turn 8, so there's not much more to say about it. It's going to be very similar, but it's just that slightly bit harder for the defender because you withdrawing units a turn earlier, and that's it. Okay, and then you have the holy chaos of free-for-all, where everyone deploys, start of the game. Whoever goes first is crippled by meeting engagement. I don't know, if it's crippled, you get to go first. But I think the meeting engagement rule is very good because it does stop whoever goes first from practically winning the game turn 1 for their turn 1. So with this one, you don't have that luxury of doing that quick stab before the opponent's reserves arrive because they're already there. But you gotta remember, your reserves are already there as well. So tricky to think what I would take with this one. I would definitely take a minimum of 2 infantry platoons to hold my objectives. Maybe an infantry formation, so whatever I do send forward to attack doesn't get lost. The biggest problem you'll have is if you pick a very defensive list and your opponent does a very defensive list, because you might just be sat there for a while, maybe not have really enough good units to actually send forward to take an objective. So for that one, I would definitely set a timer so the game does end, so you're not just staying there until someone decides to do it. But the problem is, in that situation, the person who will probably end up trying to break the deadlock is the one who gets all their units killed and ends up losing the game. So it's up to you what you take in this case. Okay, hold the pocket. The defender has ambush, deep, immediate reserves. So remember the tanks, chaps, and minefields, and they'll get 1 for every 25 points. Attacker wins if they end their turn holding an objective. Defender wins if they have repelled the attack at the end of the turn or after the 6th turn. So with this one, the defender really is going to have to defend all round, really, looking left, right, and above potential spearheads. Their reserves will be arriving from a good position if they turn up on time. So obviously, again, you want your infantry, anti-tank guns, definitely something mobile in the terms of anti-tank, so you can switch around. You don't want forward-firing guns facing the wrong way, which then leads me on to the attacker. Now, the attacker can, if they want to, deploy everything in one area, maybe the area that has the least amount of troops in front of them. I would still have another unit, maybe coming from the other way, just so the defender can't just move their defense to the new threat. But that's what you've got with this one. Attacker, you'll want infantry, artillery, and armor. Definitely flamethrowers if you have it in your force available to you. Artillery would be pretty deadly in this mission because the defender's deployment zone is so crammed. I said infantry. because this defensive pocket could be buildings, and if you've got tanks, you're not getting them out with that, and by the time their reserves arrive, you could be really struggling to cling on within 8 inches. Okay, next mission, it's a trap. Defender has ambush, deep scattered delayed reserves, and minefields. The attacker wins if they end the turn holding objective. Defender wins if they end up repelling it. So obviously no spearhead for the attacker. You can do night attack, but bear in mind you have that problem of your supporting units being there to help you, and you've got a long way to cover to get to the objectives. The biggest trick for the attacker is you are really stuck in a corner with not a lot of room. Maybe depending on the terrain, you might not be able to see much out of your deployment zone, and that's your problem. And the defender can deploy on your flank. So as you're trying to get across this 16 inches to the defender's deployment zone, you've got flank shots coming in. The only good thing is you're going to be up against limited armor because it's deep reserves, and they're scattered, delayed as well. So that could be quite a big thing. So you've got until at least turn 3 before the defender's reserves arrive, and they might not be in the right place. Which when I played this mission last, that was the case. I don't think they turned up until turn 4. And they're on the wrong side of the table and weren't able to do prevent me winning the game. And I launched the attack at night. Basically, I had 2 supporting tank units, and they didn't fire or move because they weren't needed to. That's just sometimes how the game works. Killing ground is basically, it's a trap, but the difference is the defender has immediate reserves. And what I said last one, we didn't play It's a Trap, we played Killing Ground because we rolled and it could have been Killing Ground or It's a Trap, but I said to the person who was defending that I felt Killing Ground was a better choice for them, because I feel It's a Trap, obviously because it's delayed reserves, is even more difficult for the defender, which I didn't really want for my opponent. So I don't know why, because a lot of these missions have been more to balance the defender, but It's a Trap has really gone, no, we're going to go the opposite way with that one. Okay, No Retreat is basically this very similar to Dogfight. The only difference is it's deep immediate reserves rather than deep scattered delayed reserves. But because they're not scattered, the defender's reserves will be coming from the end of their deployment zone. So really coming in from the back to go forward to defend. So fairly similar really play style to Dogfight, apart from the attacker hasn't got that problem of the reserves coming into their flank, which has happened for me, which helped me win the game. But remember, you've got 6 turns to get within 8, otherwise you could lose as the attacker. Okay, so outflanked, defender has ambush, immediate reserves, but no spearhead. So basically this, as you can see, is it labelled up no man land table quarter. The attacker can have a nice little spearhead to go from that flank. But that's what I like to let my opponent think, you see. So obviously the defender will deploy first, and they may end up deploying that flank to cover that spearhead zone, which sometimes is the better option because obviously you're going further away from where their reserves will arrive from. You do have 6 turns before the objective goes active, so you don't have to do a mad rush to go to the objective. The attacker armor would be good, artillery to plug away, some long range anti-tank maybe to sit in your deployment zone and pick off opponents' armor as they come in. Bear in mind that's subjective to terrain. Defender, again, minimum 2 infantry platoons. You get ambush, so anti-tank as well, and some armoured reserves to come in. Okay, outmaneuver is just the same as last one, but updated. The difference is the defender goes first, and because they go first, they have meet and engagement. So it's similar to the counter strike and counter attack missions that we looked at. So again, you have that choice, popping your ambush too early, etc. But remember, it's immediate reserves. You might get reserves on before the attacker even has a chance to move. So an interesting reversal on the mission. Okay, probe is a mission that will pop up if you have the same stances as your opponent, but I think it can be quite harsh. For the main reason is when you roll to see who the attacker is, they have immediate reserves scattered, albeit, while the defender has delayed reserves and scattered as well, but they do have ambush, and the objectives are live from turn 1. Now, you might think the attacker has a little bit of a disadvantage because an objective can be outside of the deployment zone. Remember, they'll be going first anyway. The problem is they're more likely to get their reserves on before the defender does. So remember when I mentioned about going that option 1 and going straight for them? As the attacker, I'd say definitely go for it. You know, if you've got a good fast unit, you can limit their ambush options. Remember, hills will cancel short terrain, so they can't put them there if it's within 16 inches. Remember that. Spread the objectives as far as you can. The ambush will probably be the biggest hindrance for you, but if you've got enough strength, why not go for both objectives at the same time? Maybe have an infantry platoon or 2 just to cover your own objectives as a defender, and you've ended up getting in this unfortunate position. But because we're building all this knowing the missions, you're going to know this. So 2 infantry platoons minimum, hold your objectives, good anti-tank guns to defend, with armor to come in, maybe even a card to delay your opponent's reserves if you can, but bear in mind, most likely they'll get their reserves before you, so just dig in and hold tight. Okay, so scouts out, another meet and engagement where you both pick the same stance. Biggest difference with this one is both players will have an objective outside of their respective deployment zones. So obviously that's always good to go for. So you've got that same option that we've had in a lot of our missions. Option 1, go straight for it. There's obviously going to be an undefended objective if you get to go first. Option 2, wait and dig in. But you're going to want at least a good infantry unit to go and secure your own objective if you're going to do that. So you want something with a good skill level or pioneers that you know can dig in. Okay, next mission is Spear Point, which is basically the original version of Bypass. Now with this one, there's an objective in the middle of the defender's deployment zone, but the defender gets to go first in this one. That is the biggest difference. It is meet and engagement defender. Again, they still have scattered delayed reserves, but have ambush as well. And the attacker's immediate ambushes before, and no spearhead either player. So this one is a little bit better for the defender to try and get on one of those outer objectives, or maybe have a push into the attacker's deployment zone. But again, personally, the bypass is the better version for the defender, because that middle objective can be a bit of a nightmare to hold on to while also trying to get something over to defend the other one. You kind of split between two, a rock and a hard place with this one. And as the attacker, you have the choice to go for either, but remember you do have objectives to defend yourself. And in addition, Spear Point is different because the objectives are live from turn 1, not turn 3 with this one. But the defender does have that option to move a unit up into that little gap there just to stop the enemy from screaming past. But then you're sacrificing that unit just to buy you time. Okay, Valley of Death is the last mission I'll look at. So there are some I've left out: Annihilation, Gauntlet, and Vanguard. Missions that can't be selected via the extended mission matrix, so I've left them out for that reason. So Valley of Death is interesting. It's another one where the defender is not starting on their objectives and will have to move. Both sides do have to have stuff in reserve, but the attacker has immediate reserves, has meet and engagement, and the defender has scattered delayed reserves. The mission can't be won until turn 6, so obviously there's no rush, but the attacker can get there within a turn or two. In the mission where it was Gauntlet, it was very difficult for the defender to win this one. With this one, all they've done is turned it on its side, so it means at least the defender's a little bit more closer to the objective this time, and the reserves should be able to get into a good position to fire on the attacker's unit depending on terrain. Remember, they are delayed, so might not get there in time. So if the attacker, definitely take something that can delay them even further if you can. You want definitely something fast, maybe mobile infantry to get onto objective and secure it. Bear in mind you will have to have stuff in reserve, so hopefully your reserves can come on quickly. Otherwise, if you don't get stuff on early, you could be in trouble. And if they get reserves on before you get reserves on, which you'll have at least one on if you're really unlucky, things are going to go from bad to worse for you for that one. And for the defender, you're going to want something hard hitting to go on these flanks as the attacker comes in. Bear in mind they can hit your flanks as well, just to kind of roll you up on those sides. But you'll want to have some infantry, mobile infantry, to get onto the objectives and dig in, and have something there to support them as well. Okay, folks, that is it from me. Remember, that is all my opinion. I am no Lord of War, Master of War. I've played the game a few times and sometimes I win, but it depends if the dice a lot of time. Everyone has their own way of playing. It's always nice playing new people because obviously they have a complete different style of playing and you have to really kind of figure them out to achieve victory. But I think the biggest thing is to know your list, know your force, know your nation you're playing, get used to them, what their abilities are, what their weaknesses are, play to their strengths, and that should be better. And remember, it's not always about winning, it's always about having a good game. You don't want to be beating someone in turn 1 and then just giving yourself a big pat on the back, because those people might never want to play you again, or the game in general, in which case Flames of War loses out more than anyone. But yeah, the more missions you play, the better you'll get at the game. The more games you play, the better, and the more different people you play. But that's just a guide, mainly for newer people getting into the hobby. You know, don't be afraid of any mission. No mission is impossible to win. But make sure you make some good decisions, because bad decisions can lose you the game. But that's just the case in pretty much every war game. And remember, dice are probably going to have the bigger impact on it than anything. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked, just give the video a like and subscribe. Feel free to comment any difference of opinion. I'm welcome to debate it. It's always good to be asked questions. I might have missed some things that people want advice on, but this one someone requested for me to do this video, and I thought it'd be quite fun to do. And that's it really. And again, feel free to comment and just get involved. And if you've made it this far, then big clap to you. You've heard me droning on for, well, almost 54 minutes now. So I hope you enjoyed this video.